All right, good afternoon. We are delighted that you're here. We're delighted to be joined by Patten, who is, as you know, the Secretary General Special Representative for Sexual Violence in Conflict. She is joined by Chloé Mornay-Bassinger, who is an expert in her office. And Ms. Patten and Chloé are here to brief you on their recent travels to Israel and the occupied Palestinian territory. I believe Ms. Patten will have some opening remarks, and then we will take your questions.
Thank you, Stefan. Good afternoon, members of the press, and thank you for being here. I know you've all been waiting for this briefing for a while. I just want to start by the mission dates to say that following an invitation that I received from the government of Israel to first-handedly, I quote, hear and see the testimonies and evidence of these heinous acts of conflict-related sexual violence, I led an official visit to Israel from the 29th of January to the 14th of February. And I was supported by a technical team with relevant expertise, such as a forensic pathologist and a digital and open source information analyst, in addition to specialists in the safe and ethical interviewing of victim survivors and witnesses of sexual violence crimes. I must stress that my mission was neither intended nor mandated to be investigative in nature. This is a mandate vested in other UN bodies. Prior to the mission, the scope and parameters of the visit were agreed in advance with the Israeli authorities, the objective being to gather, analyze, and verify reports of conflict-related sexual violence related to the Hamas-led terror attacks of 7th of October and in their aftermath, in order to inform reporting in the exercise of my mandate, including to the UN Security Council. Considering that prior to the mission, I had received reports allegedly committed by Israeli security forces and settlers, one of the parameters of the visit which I insisted upon with the government of Israel was a visit to the occupied West Bank to engage with the Palestinian authorities, civil society organizations, release detainees and other relevant actors, and to raise these allegations with the Israeli government, to which they agreed. Considering the ongoing hostilities, I did not request to visit the Gaza Strip, where I must say there are several other UN entities present and operational, including some that actually monitor and address sexual and gender-based violence, and who will send information to my office, as is the usual practice, for its inclusion in the annual report of the Secretary General. In terms of standard of proof, the visit adhered to standard UN methodology, and we conducted our work in accordance with the principles of independence, impartiality, objectivity, transparency, integrity, and the principle of do no harm, including in relation to guarantees of confidentiality and the protection of victims and witnesses. We also followed a survivor, victim-centered, and trauma-informed approach. The standard of proof we adopted is one of reasonable grounds to believe, consistent with the practice of other investigative bodies, and our conclusions were based on our own assessment of the credibility and reliability of the witnesses we met, verifying the sources, cross-referencing the relevant material and information, and assessing whether in all the circumstances there was sufficient credible and reliable information to make a finding in fact. But I must say that where more information has supported a finding of fact, we have made a finding of clear and convincing information, which is above reasonable grounds to believe and beyond the threshold of beyond the reasonable doubt. And you will see in the report that this is the case with regard to our findings related to hostages. With regard to our findings of circumstantial information, it has the ordinary definition of that term, which is that such information is indirect and does not, on its face, prove the fact in issue, but gives rise to a logical inference that the fact exists. The team conducted a total of 33 meetings with Israeli institutions, including relevant line ministries, as well as Israeli Defense Forces, but it's all in the report. I will not go over it. We conducted confidential interviews with 34 people, including with survivors and witnesses of the 7th of October attacks, released hostages, first responders, and service providers. And we also met with families and relatives of hostages still held in captivity, in addition to some other actors. The team reviewed over 5,000 photographic images and some 50 hours of footage of the attacks, provided partly by various state agencies, but also through our own independent online review of various open sources. Though I must add that we found the material provided by the national agencies to be authentic and unmanipulated. And a lot of those footage was captured through militants' body cams and dash cams, individual cell phone, CCTV, and traffic surveillance cameras. I will go over the challenges that we met because that will help you to understand our findings also. We encountered a number of challenges in both the gathering and verification of incidents of sexual violence, and these include limited professionally gathered forensic material, inaccurate and unreliable forensic interpretation by some non-professionals, the extremely limited availability of victims and survivors and witnesses of sexual violence due partly to the internal displacement of affected communities, the lack of public trust and confidence in national and international institutions, including the UN, but also the questioning by some interlocutors of the narrow focus of the mission on crimes of sexual violence, given the range of other grave crimes committed on the 7th of October and its aftermath. And of course, the length of time of the mission. We were there for only 2.5 weeks. I also need to say that in that context, we did not meet with any survivor of sexual violence of the 7th of October attacks, despite our efforts. On the very first day, I made a call for survivors to come forward, but we received information that a handful of them were receiving very specialized trauma treatment and were not prepared to come forward. The mission was a difficult one in terms of what we heard and the details of the most shocking brutality of the attacks by Hamas and other armed groups that we received. We saw a catalogue of the most extreme and inhumane forms of torture and other horrors. But the mission helped us to better understand the context of the attacks, how it was a coordinated attack by Hamas and other armed groups, including Palestinian Islamic Jihad, popular resistance committees, other armed elements, and armed and unarmed civilians. It helped us to understand how the complexity and modus operandi of these attacks, which included multiple civilian and military targets, demonstrated a significant level of planning, coordination, and prior knowledge of the targets selected. The report also sets out how Hamas and the other armed elements came very well equipped with a range of high caliber and military-grade weapons, interviews with stakeholders and materials reviewed described an indiscriminate campaign to kill, inflict suffering, and abduct the maximum number possible of men, women, and children, soldiers and civilians alike in the minimum possible amount of time. Coming to the findings, with regard to the hostages taken to Gaza, we found clear and convincing information that sexual violence, including rape, sexualized torture, cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment has been committed against captives. And we also have reasonable grounds to believe that such violence may still be ongoing against those still held in captivity. I pause and must add that I am of the strong opinion that this finding does not in any way legitimize further violence, but actually reinforces the need for an urgent ceasefire, as continuing this war will not serve will not serve to protect hostages from risk of further sexual violence. And I think, on the contrary, for the sake of the hostages, a ceasefire should be a priority. And I also want to reiterate that eradicating sexual violence is fundamentally an agenda for peace. And as the SG, other UN colleagues, and I have continuously reiterated, the end goal of this mandate is not a war without rape, but a world without war. And in this regard, I reiterate the SG's consistent call for urgent humanitarian ceasefire. Another finding, we also found that there are reasonable grounds to believe that conflict-related sexual violence, including rape and gang rape, occurred during the 7th of October attacks in at least 3 locations, namely the Nova Music Festival site and its surroundings, Road 232, and Kibbutz Reim. And in most of these incidents, victims were first subjected to rape and then killed, and at least 2 incidents relate to the rape of women's corpses. And as you know, the Nova Music Festival we found was a site of grave violations, including brutal mass murders, with several hundreds of bodies recovered from the site, in addition to many abductions. Bodies were also found with extensive burn damage. Then a third set of findings is that across multiple locations, we found a recurring pattern of victims found fully or partially undressed, bound and shot. And we found that although circumstantial, such a pattern may be indicative of some forms of sexual violence, including sexualized torture, cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment. At the same time, with regard to Kibbutz Be'eri, I mentioned Kibbutz Be'eri because it was firstly severely affected by the 7th of October attacks, having suffered a significant number of casualties, over 10% of its population killed, including children, and some 50 people taken hostage to Gaza. Some allegations of sexual violence previously reported and highly publicized in the media were determined by us to be unfounded. And I'm here, I'll just give one example, referring to the allegation of a pregnant woman whose womb had reportedly been ripped open before she was killed, with her fetus stabbed while still inside her. You will also see in the report that there are many references to reported incidents of sexual violence with respect to different locations, which we could not verify for many different reasons. Coming to my visit to the occupied West Bank, with regard to that visit, whose purpose was different, considering that we have UN-verified information on conflict-related sexual violence, which will be, as I mentioned, included in the annual report of the Secretary General, we nevertheless received, whilst there, from several interlocutors, information about cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment of Palestinians, men and women in detention, also under the administrative detention, including sexual violence in the forms of invasive body searches, threats of rape, and prolonged forced nudity. Concerns were also raised about disproportionate physical and sexual violence, including sexual harassment and threats of rape during house raids, including at night and at checkpoints. But again, other UN entities present in the occupied West Bank have collected more in-depth information in this regard. In the report, I have made a number of recommendations, including encouraging the government of Israel to grant access to the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights and the Independent International Commission of Inquiry to conduct a fully fledged independent investigations, calling on Hamas to immediately and unconditionally release all individuals held in captivity and to ensure their protection, including from sexual violence, encouraging the government of Israel to consider signing a framework of cooperation with my office to strengthen capacity on justice and accountability for conflict-related sexual violence, but also security sector engagement, training, and oversight to prevent and address conflict-related sexual violence. And of course, I echo again the calls of the Secretary General for a humanitarian ceasefire to alleviate the suffering of civilians in Gaza. But before I conclude, I must add that the true prevalence of sexual violence during the 7th of October attacks and their aftermath may take months or years to emerge and may never be fully known, given that sexual violence remains a chronically underreported crime in every conflict-affected setting due to trauma, stigma, and fear faced by survivors, but also in the context of Israel, where many did not survive the sexual violence. And as in other conflict-affected contexts, there is a significant likelihood that the findings of my mission, the mission that I led in terms of verified violations, only partially reflect the crimes actually committed. And that is why there is a dedicated recommendation for access to OHCHR. And with this, I'll be very happy to take some of your questions.
Thank you very much. Edie, please.
Thank you very much, Ms. Patten. Edith Lederer from the Associated Press. On behalf of the United Nations Correspondents Association, welcome and thank you for doing this briefing, which I know many of us have been waiting for. A couple of follow-up questions. First, you used the words reasonable grounds quite often. Is there a scale of how that ranks in terms of credibility, and how would you describe that? And secondly, was there any evidence that you saw that you believe could lead to the identification of specific perpetrators of this sexual violence? Thank you.
I'll take a few short. No, okay, perfectly. Well, Edith, I think you missed it because I did address the standard of proof that we used, that we adopted, being of reasonable grounds to believe, consistent with the practice of investigative bodies. And how did we draw our conclusion? We base it on our own assessment of the credibility and reliability of the witnesses that we met. But we also verified the sources, cross-referenced the relevant material and information, and assessing whether, in all the circumstances, that there was sufficient, credible, and reliable information to make a finding. With regard to your question about attribution, not being an investigative body, and given the short period of time that we were on the ground, and given the purpose of the mission being to gather, verify information for its inclusion in the annual report of the Secretary General and briefing to the Security Council, we did not go into attribution, and but that doesn't mean that it's. I think attribution is not an impossible exercise. That's why I make a call for a fully fledged investigation that could actually focus on attribution and accountability.
What I was really trying to get at was, is there a higher standard than reasonable grounds? What would be even more compelling?
Well, I explained this in my presentation that where we received more information, that, for example, in the case of the hostages, having met hostages firsthand, we made a finding of clear and convincing information, which is higher than reasonable grounds to believe, but lower than the standard of beyond the reasonable doubt, like for a criminal case. And then the last one is the circumstantial information. And in any case, rape being what it is, leaving no tangible, visible injuries, in many instances, one has to rely on circumstantial evidence and witness testimony.
Thank you, Deji.
Yes, Ms. Patten, Shudeju with China Central Television here. Please help me comprehend this. The objective of this visit was to gather analysis and analyze, verify allegations, and yet it's not an investigative nature. You interviewed more than 34 people, had 33 meetings, reviewed over 5,000 photos, 50 hours of video, then what is the nature of this? These are not investigations?
Is that it? One question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, one question.
One question. Yes, I mean, like, maybe I'll tell you what did not, what an investigation would entail that we did not do. Like I said, we went to gather, not just to collect in terms of being given information. So we took cognizance of what the Israeli authorities had to present to us with the verification process and the analysis process, but we also gathered independent information. Unlike an investigation which would contains clear terms of reference and would include tasks like investigating all alleged violations of international humanitarian law and abuses of international human rights law, we looked at sexual violence pretty much in a vacuum. The way an investigation would collect and analyze evidence of such violations and crimes perpetrated, we collected information, which is completely a different threshold. We did not record or preserve information, documentation, and evidence, including interviews, witness testimony, and forensic material. We did not identify those responsible with a view to ensuring that perpetrators of violations are held accountable. We did not make recommendations on accountability. We conducted a mission over 2.5 weeks, and we did not look at the root causes.
But it sounds to me still like an investigation. You know?
Sorry?
It sounds to me still like an investigation. I mean, you have the result, you have all those working methods, right?
Okay. Maybe, Chloe, you can add a few elements.
I'll add a few elements to try to kind of make the difference. There are different threshold of standards in terms of how you deal with events of such type. As the SRSG has mentioned, we gathered, but we did not collect. Might not make sense to you, but it's quite important for the lawyer that I am. It makes very much difference also if you collect or gather information or if you collect or gather evidence. We did not collect or gather evidences. Similarly, also, we looked only at one crime. We didn't look at the nexus of crime. If you're doing an investigation, you need to look at the full fledge of the fact. In the case of an international investigation, you would need to basically look at the way the attack was conducted, the relevant command control of those who were conducting the attack. We did not look into this. That's why we cannot make attribution, which an investigation like the COI, for example, on the same region would be doing and is doing in generally speaking. We also did not have a number of specialized capacity that you would require if you had investigation. For example, no military expert. And obviously, an investigation takes months because you're corroborating individual crimes as individual crimes. This exercise looks at, and you will see that reference in the report, a finding of fact, not a finding of law, which means we also did not say what kind of crime. We did not make a legal assessment of it, which an investigation would do. So there is a number of very significant differences between the two types of exercises.
So legally speaking, this report, the finding of this report cannot be evidence.
No, not at all.
Okay.
Like I said, the findings will be used for the purpose of the annual report of the Secretary General, which will be debated before the Council on the 25th of April. And given the methodology of our work, we need UN-verified information in information that we pass on to the Security Council.
Thank you. Michelle, then Nabil.
Thank you. Michelle Nichols from Reuters. Thanks for the briefing. I just wanted to quickly ask about some of the dates. You were first invited at the start of November and then you accepted at the end of November. Why did it sort of take another 2 months before you're on the ground? And then with regard to your call for, or you saying that, a a fully fledged investigation is needed to sort of look at the scope and attribution and whatnot, who do you think might be best placed to carry out such an investigation? Thanks.
Right. Indeed, I received an invitation on the 8th of November, and I responded positively on the 27th of November. And because in the letter of invitation, they wanted me to come as soon as possible. And I responded on the 27th of November, indicating that I would be able to come with a team on the 8th of December, the week of the 8th of December. But that did not happen because the permanent representative did not meet with me until the 12th, in spite of receiving the letter on the 27th, in which I proposed those dates. The meeting we had was on the 11th or 12th of December, when he was then suggesting the week, the Christmas week. Or the New Year's. He suggested the week of the 26th of December or the 2nd of January, and I indicated to him that that would not be possible because I'll be on leave, and so will be many members of my team. And then we had to, then we settled for the dates of the 28th. In terms of I think OHCHR and the Commission of Inquiry has the relevant mandate. I mean, like you would know that the Human Rights Council on the 27th of May 2021 established this ongoing, independent, international Commission of Inquiry, and it has a broad mandate to look into all alleged violations of international humanitarian and abuses of international human rights law in Israel, but also in OPT, including East Jerusalem, since 13th of April 2021. So I think the COI is the best place to do this work.
Nabil?
Thank you, Nabil Abisab, Al Arabi TV station. So maybe I missed it, but have you met survivors or victims? And you said that some of the bodies were shot or maybe were subject to sexual violence and then they were killed after that. Have you seen these bodies yourself? And also you said that you still believe that sexual violence is perpetrated against the captives in Gaza. What makes you believe that there's
Sexual violence? Can you
sexual violence
hostages.
against the hostages? Yes. So what makes you believe that they are still subject to sexual violence?
But as you will see in the report, we say that I did not meet with any survivors of sexual violence of the 7th of October attacks or its aftermath. We tried, but we received information that a handful of survivors were receiving very specialized trauma treatment and were too traumatized to speak. And, you know, I know from experience that survivors of sexual violence, that it's a very sensitive issue, and that they need to come forward in their own time, on their own terms. So we did not push, but we had credible evidence for a number of cases which I have mentioned and which are in the report. With regards to hostages, we met with hostages and received first-hand information, and that's what we base our finding upon.
So you mean your conclusion is based on medical reports or witnesses, or what kind of information exactly?
First-hand, with regard to the hostages, first-hand credible information in terms of my assessment of credibility, and we're verifying and cross-referencing.
Abdelhamid and Don.
My name is Abdul Hamid Sayam from the Arabic daily Al-Quds Al-Arabi. I hope you will be patient with some of my questions. First, I expected you to say a few words about the 100,000 Palestinians who were killed and maimed and buried under the rubble, and the destruction of the people, of the lives of the people in Gaza completely. So going to the issue now, I wish you could compare how many the hours you spend in Israel and the hours you spend in the West Bank. And did you meet with those Israeli released hostages who spoke in public how they were respected, how they were treated? One of them said they protected us with their bodies. Did you see the Israeli hostage who left the captivity with her puppy in her arms? Did you see that they came out with their mineral waters in their hand, healthy? Did you talk to them? Did you talk to the Palestinians who were also released? Did you talk to Ahd al-Tamimi, who came out broken, cannot now talk to anyone? Did you talk to the people who are involved with these? I see this report with, I apologize for saying, it's only a validation of the Israeli narrative. And we just got the report. We just got the report recently. We didn't have time to read it well, but can you just address that there is a woman being raped and she bit the finger of her rapist? How could you stand with the rapist? Thank you.
In terms of the hours that I spent in Ramallah, I was in Israel for 1 week only. I arrived on I started my work on the 29th, and the last day of work was the 4th of February, and I was in Ramallah for 1 day, 1 full day, and my technical team went back for another day. So I was just there for a week, and they were there for an extra 1 week and a half. The hours of time, in terms of the amount of time spent in occupied Palestinian territory and Israel, what determine it is the fact that the purpose of the mission. The purpose of I don't have to go to occupied Palestinian territory to collect or to gather information, because I receive UN verified information. The specificity of the mission in Israel is because of the absence of any UN agencies and the need for UN verified information for its inclusion into the annual report of the Secretary General. Hence, the distinction between in terms of the amount of time spent there. And I can tell you that there is an abundance of information from the other side that we have already received, because we launched our as per our usual methodology, for the purpose of preparing the annual report of the Secretary General. We sent questionnaire out in the field, and we did send our questionnaire back in October to UNRWA, UNSCO, OHCHR for information to be included in the SG's report. But because I had some information already in December, when I was considering whether to accept the invitation of the Israeli authorities, I set this as a parameter, as I explained, and wanted to raise it with the Israeli authorities, which I did. In terms of the hostages, I cannot disclose who I have met, because I have to preserve, and that is why we have only issued an edited version of the confidential report that I gave to the Secretary General last week, because it's in the spirit of preserving the confidentiality of those that I've met and the sources. I can only tell you that I have met released hostages and that I found their version to be extremely credible. I have met 4 Palestinian detainees recently released, and I got very disturbing information from them, which I have mentioned, physical threats of rape, which I have highlighted.
Thank you.
Would Israel allow Navi Pillay to enter and investigate? She had been prevented.
You should ask Israel. Yeah, like you, I'm aware that they have, and that is why one of the first recommendation. If you look at the recommendation section at the very end of the report, one of the first recommendations that I make to the Israeli government is to give access to OHCHR and or Commission of Inquiry to conduct fully fledged investigations.
Dawn, and then Ibtisam.
Thank you for the briefing. I'm Dawn Clancy with Pass Blue. I have a follow-up and then a question. You mentioned the survivors that you didn't get to meet with, that you were told that they are seeking specialized treatment, they're too traumatized. How do you know that? Who told you that they're seeking?
I'm sorry, I cannot disclose that information.
Okay. Then my other questions, and forgive me, because I feel like with this report I'm now a little bit more confused than I was before I read it. I noticed on social media that you had met with a Zaka volunteer. His name's Yossi Landau. Yossi Landau has been in the media. He was in the New York Times investigation that has been through the shredder at this point as far as figuring out what's accurate and what's not. In this report, you mentioned that there was a media report about a woman who was pregnant, her stomach was ripped open, the baby was ripped out, it was stabbed, the umbilical cord. That story came from Yossi Landau, who on social media you can see on their Zaka Instagram page you met with. So when I see that, and then I read this report, I'm lost. To what extent do I believe this? This isn't an investigation, but it kind of is. So then how is this any different than the New York Times story if you're just collecting evidence? I'm just really trying to, I mean, if I'm not being clear, please let me know and I'll try to.
Well, you are indeed not very clear, but
What wasn't clear? What?
well, I mean, like, I don't get the gist of the question. I mean, like, I think my report is pretty straightforward. We explained that we went to 4 different locations based on.
But my question is,
no,
you
no,
met with Yossi Landau.
yes,
He's
I
the
will.
creator of that.
I will. I know. I get your question. I mean, first of all, yeah. I mean, like, first of all, because you're talking about social media. Yes, indeed. You've seen the photo, and it was at Kibbutz Be'eri. It was at Kibbutz Be'eri, and if you read the section of the report, starting with paragraph 62, we say what we have been able to verify, and that we went there because of the attention paid to Kibbutz Be'eri and sexual violence. And I have mentioned in my report at least 2 allegations previously reported that we found to be unfounded. And we explained that it's due to either new superseding information or inconsistency in the information gathered, including first responder testimonies, photographic evidence, and other information. And I give two examples. Yes, we found it to be unfounded.
Ibtisam,
Can I just follow up really quick, please? The reason I'm asking this is because there are real consequences to this report. I mean, I know you keep saying the Commission of Inquiry, they need to go and do their investigation, which I believe they're doing, but the Israeli ambassador to the UN has said publicly, we're not going to cooperate with that. So that recommendation is already DOA, I guess you could say. Mm. Are you at all concerned that this report, sexual violence against women, this is being weaponized as a way to continue violence in Gaza? That's why I'm asking these questions, because this is an important report.
Well, I understand that the invitation to me came as a result of pressure from civil society organizations in Israel and academia. And I do hope, and I can tell you that when I was there, no one told me it's too little, too late, or you came too late. On the contrary, many interlocutors told me, we are still mourning. Why are you here? And why this narrow focus on sexual violence? And everywhere, throughout the report, you see that I mentioned that could not be verified, and verification would entail a proper investigation. And I hope that the relevant stakeholders in Israel would pick it up and put pressure on their government to have a fully fledged investigation that would be able to cast real light on what really happen or close to, get as close as possible to what happened. And I fully agree with what you're saying. I mean, like, that is why, in spite of not being an investigation, I did not want to go and to rubber stamp anything that's given to me. And I took the trouble of including, I'm a small office, I am almost totally dependent on extra budgetary resources, but still found it necessary to equip myself with some expertise that included a forensic pathologist and a digital analyst.
Ibtisam, then Mike, and then we'll have to go online.
Hi, my name is Ibtisam Azim Al Arabi Al Jadid newspaper. I have a few follow-ups. First, regarding the issue that you touched upon at the end, and the issue of the fact that your mandate was not of an investigative mandate. And the question for me is, then, if it wasn't investigative, why then issuing the report? If you could clarify that. And then there are several issues that you both talked about. And if you could clarify the issue of information and evidence, because you keep talking about you got information, but I'm not sure if it's the same as evidence, or my impression was that you are making a differentiation. If you could please clarify that. And then also the videos that you saw and the information that you got, were you able to, like, collect that in order to pass this to the COI committee for their investigation? And last thing about your paragraph regarding Palestinian women, there was a statement issued by special rapporteurs about 2 weeks ago that they said that at least 2 female Palestinian detainees were reportedly raped, while others were reportedly threatened with rape and sexual violence, etc. So my question here, I don't see in your paragraph regarding Palestinian detainees, I don't see any talk about rape, but you talked about other stuff, of course, that also. So if you could clarify this, thank you.
Sure. Yeah, coming back to the fact that the mandate is not investigative in nature, and that the purpose of the mission was to gather, analyze, and verify information for its potential inclusion in reporting to the Security Council. I think I have explained this, because otherwise, without this mission, there will be a total blackout in the report of the Secretary General with regard to the 7th of October attacks, and that was the context. Information versus evidence. I mean, like, I think you've answered it yourself. I mean, like, we're not talking evidence will stand in a court of law. We did not collect. We are not the custodian of any material from this. And your question is about the raw footage or the photos. We did not. So we have nothing. We have nothing except for this report to pass on. It's a public report. So we have nothing to pass on to the Commission of Inquiry, because we have not collected anything. No witness testimony, no footage, no photos that we can hand over. We're not the custodian of any material.
But if I may ask, why not? Because it's not clear
because
for me.
that is not
because it's not your mandate.
Because it's not an investigation. Because I did not.
But weren't you supposed also to partly bring this evidence to the committee?
Not at all. I've explained what was the purpose of the mission. The purpose of the mission was to gather and verify the information for its potential inclusion in the annual report of the Secretary General, which is a prerogative. The information base is there. It is for the Secretary General to decide on what goes into his report, but he needed that UN verified information. So the verification part was crucial, and that is why in the report, wherever we were not in a position to verify, we have been very candid to say that we got reports of a number of incidents, but we were not able to verify. And the bulk, and we have explained, I also explained all the challenges that we encountered, linked to the fact that there was no proper crime processing because of all the, of the challenges posed to the Israeli authorities, multiple locations, multiple perpetrators, high mass casualties, and the priority, they prioritized rescue operation over for collection of forensic evidence. They prioritized recovery, identification, and burial because of, according to religious practices, over collection of forensic evidence. That there was very little. There was very little forensic evidence. So these are These are some of the challenges that we face, and that's why we found because, like I said, rape does not leave tangible, visible traces of injuries, not even loss of blood. And so we that's why in the report we take the stand that this is circumstantial because you see a photo of a woman naked. It does not convey rape, but it is circumstantial. It is circumstantial indicators. Which require further. That's why I'm gonna come back to the investigation, to a fully fledged investigation. There's a lot of circumstantial information that we gathered. When it comes to the Palestinian women, as I said, I engaged with the Palestinian ambassador before going on 2 occasions, before going on mission, and asked him to facilitate access to a number of recently released detainees. And we were able to meet with 4 recently released detainees. I did not receive, but I didn't go to gather information. Again, I stress that I did not go to, but I met with them, as I met with civil society organization, Independent Human Rights Commission, a number of line ministries, and a large number of civil society organizations. And I did not get any information about rape. I got information about threats of rape. I have taken cognizance of the report of the Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women, who is an independent expert. But we went on a mission, and I am here to report what I found. So I have told you what I have in terms of information received, and from my visit to Ramallah, and I will take into account the UN verified information that I will receive from relevant UN entities tasked to document and monitor cases.
Mike?
Mike Wagenheim with I-24 News. Firstly, thank you for doing the briefing today. Has the door been left open at all? It's the first question. Has the door been left open at all to go back and speak with those victims that are currently undergoing traumatic treatment after their treatment is over? Has that possibility been left open?
I have made a recommendation in the report to encourage the government of Israel to sign a framework of cooperation with my office, which then could, if there is such a framework of cooperation, that would include certainly support to survivors of sexual violence. That could eventually pave the way, because victims take time. I mean, like, I have come across victims reporting after 25 years in Bosnia, and they will come forward in their own time, on their own terms.
Understandable. Second question. I understand fully the recommendations to turn an investigation over to the COI and the Office of the Commissioner of Human Rights. But in the meantime, your report is going to the Secretary General, your report to the Security Council. What advice, as a professional, as an advocate, would you give to them to do with this report? What course of action would you recommend to them, having gathered this information?
Them is who?
The Secretary General and the UN Security Council. Your reports will go to them, correct?
Yes. my report has gone already to the Secretary General.
So what do you feel is a proper course of action for them to take at this point?
Well, to certainly to reinforce my recommendation regarding fully fledged investigation by competent UN bodies. Otherwise, I echo his call, that of the Secretary General, for a humanitarian ceasefire, and in the context, as I said, of the findings regarding the hostages, I think more than ever a ceasefire should be a priority. So that would be my call, because this is what can protect that's what can protect the hostages still in captivity, a ceasefire.
Last question. Is there an ongoing conversation about a framework of cooperation going forward?
No. I mean, like, my report is being made public today. When I discussed it in Israel, I did not get any sense, any feedback, any positive feedback. I mean, like, it was left in the open, but now it is in the form of a recommendation. So the ball is in the court of the government of Israel.
We're going to take two quick online questions. Farnaz, Vasily. Farnaz?
Hello, thank you very much. Can you hear me? Thank you very much for doing this briefing. This is Farnaz Fassi from the New York Times. I have two questions. On the issue of your meetings in the West Bank and the references to some of the allegations about sexual violence on Palestinian women, the report only says that you heard this from the people you interviewed. It doesn't make any conclusions about what you found, in the same way that it made. Did you find credible, like you said, credible and clear information? Did you find grounds to believe? What is what is your founding in terms of the Palestinians? The other question I have is, would you say that you found a pattern of sexual violence that was a strategy of Hamas, both in the October 7th attacks and in regards to the hostages? And the third question I have, is Kibbutz Be'eri. The report says that you couldn't verify incidents of rape and sexual violence, and then you specifically point to two cases mentioned by media and say they were unfounded. Do you mean that only these two incidents in Kibbutz Be'eri you couldn't verify, or do you mean that you couldn't verify any incidents of sexual violence in Kibbutz Be'eri? Thank you very much.
Right. Yeah, precisely because the purpose of the visit in the West Bank was completely different to the visit in Israel, which was precisely to collect and verify information. In the West Bank, I went because I had received UN-verified information about some reports of sexual violence allegedly perpetrated by IDF soldiers and settlers. And as I said earlier, I made this a point to insist, as one of the parameters of the visit, that I am allowed to go, that I'm able to go to the West Bank, and to raise all reports with. So that's exactly what I did. There was no point for me to gather, to verify, to come to any conclusion. And as I said, information for the occupied West Bank, for Gaza, will come from the relevant UN entities, and we have asked this information since October, in line with our methodology for the preparation of the annual report of the Secretary General. With regard to the question of verification, maybe I'll give the floor to Chloe, because she was there for an extra and a half week. The verification work was done mostly by the technical team led by her. So I'll let her, but I just want to come to no, we did not make any finding as to any pattern, because we did not look into attribution. And you can imagine that it is hard to to do a serious attribution exercise in 2.5 weeks, given the multiple locations, the multiple perpetrators, and the high casualties. With this, Chloe.
Yeah, just on. Okay, on Barry, just to clarify, what we found was that there were 2 allegations we looked into that were unfounded, and they're very well described in the report, and you'll recognize them because they were highly publicized in the press. The rest we could not verify. So in short, to answer your question, no, we could not verify any sexual violence in Barry at this point, which does not mean necessarily it didn't occur. It means we couldn't verify it. And 2 of the cases that were reported were found to be unfounded.
In fact, I just want to add, there's a third one, Chloe, where there was an allegation that there were objects like knives inserted in the genitalia of a woman. I mean, like, the team reviewed the photos, and we did not find anything like that. And I did mention, like, one of the challenges faced of course, by the Israeli government, but which impacted our own work, was the fact that inaccurate, unreliable forensic conclusions were drawn by untrained volunteer first responders. And we give some examples. We give some examples in the report, such as interpreting an anal dilation as anal penetration, when, according to our forensic expert, we've extensive burn damage. This is what you get, anal dilation, and the position of the body as a result of severe burn damage, again interpreted as being sexual violence. We've spread legs, etc. So that also, it may not be in bad faith. I don't know, but it is a fact that we found many instances of unreliable, inaccurate forensic interpretation by untrained people.
All right, we'll go to Lisa from Haaretz online, and then Ephraim.
Yes. Hello, Ms. Patten. Thank you very much for the briefing. I think Farnaz actually asked this question, but I am not sure you addressed it quite directly. Am I correct that you cannot attribute specific sexual violence specifically to the Hamas? And am I correct that you cannot conclude that the sexual violence was of a systematic character?
It's not that I cannot attribute, it's that I did not go into attribution, given the multiple actors. It was Hamas, it was the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, there were other armed groups, there were civilians, armed and unarmed. I did not go into attribution, given the time, and given the fact that I was not conducting an investigation. That's one. What is the other question?
The systematic character.
Oh, the systematic. No, like Chloe mentioned, the distinguishing factor from the exercise that we set out to do, the gathering and verification of information for the purpose of its inclusion in the annual report of the Secretary General versus an investigation. That's where you would do an analysis and you would come up with finding, you would qualify the crimes, whether it constitute a crime against humanity, a war crime, and you would go into elements of widespread or systematic. No, we did not go into that. We did not do that kind of exercise.
Great. Ephraim?
Thank you so much. Ephraim Kusaifi with Arab News Daily. I have 2 quick follow-ups and then a question. Why can't you tell us who spoke in the names of the victims? Is it the families that told you can't see them, the centers where they're being treated, or is it the Israeli authorities? Why can't you tell us?
So I'm not going to answer your question because, again, I'll go back to what's very clear in our report, which is the methodology of do no harm. We work, as the SRSG said, on a trauma-informed and victim-centric approach. We do that not in Israel and Palestine. We do that everywhere in the world.
Okay.
And as a result, basically, we have to respect, we do seek to meet with survivors because, as the SRG mentioned, first-hand accounts are obviously of a particular weight. However, we're not going to force or pressure anybody to come forward. We're not going to add to the stigmatization that may already have occurred. And so we do the work we do, both in the case of Israel, we were presented, and I'll go back to the point about Yossi Lendo, we were presented with a number of person, material, etc., from the national authorities. We reviewed those, we assessed their credibility, and discarded those that we didn't find to be credible. And we also gathered and went and did our own independent gathering of information from other sources. And those sources are privileged sources because they consent to speak to us on the basis that they will not be troubled
So is it
or
the national
identified.
authorities who told you can't meet with the victims or somebody else?
No.
You can't tell us.
It's
okay.
not the
Did
national
you feel, Ms.
authorities.
Patten, that you've had enough freedom on your mission? Were you moving around freely? Did you interview people separately, or were you always accompanied by Israeli authorities?
No. Thank you for the question, because that was one of the parameters that I set out in the letter of acceptance for a visit, was freedom of movement, and for myself and my technical team after I leave. And I must say that and that's why I also issued a press statement setting out those parameters before going on mission, a few days before going on mission, so that the whole world knows what are the agreed parameters. And I must say that the government of Israel fully cooperated. And although the permanent representative of Israel was in Israel at the time, he only attended a meeting, part of the first meeting that I had with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, because he came in late. But
Okay.
I was not chaperoned.
Okay, my question. This is because the story, as you see, you've been following the coverage of the story, and it's been surrounded by a lot of falsehoods and fraudulent reporting. We know that the journalist who broke the story in the first place, first of all, went around every single trauma center in Israel, and every hospital, and couldn't find one complaint, etc., etc. We've heard a lot of falsehoods surrounding this very sensitive story. So how did you approach a story like this that's filled with misinformation already, also in light of other propaganda stories that we have been seeing, like the beheaded babies that turned out to be a lie, and many others like that? How did you approach it, knowing that it's riddled with such uncertainty and falsehood, and what did you do to make sure your report does not feed into the narrative of falsehood and propaganda? Thank you.
Well, again, thank you for the question. I mean, as you can see, although we did not conduct an investigation, but we used the UN methodology in terms of our standard of proof. And as I said, I took the step of including some level of relevant expertise in my team, including a forensic pathologist, including a digital and open source information analyst, and other people equipped to do safe and ethical interviewing. I knew about the risk of my mandate being instrumentalized, and was aware of that risk at all times, and that is why the technical team was tasked to do independent verification. That's why I did not go into prevalence. I do not have numbers in the report, because for me one case is more than enough. It's not about I didn't go on a bookkeeping exercise. The first letter that I received from the government of Israel talked about hundreds, if not thousands, of cases of brutal sexual violence perpetrated against men, women, and children. I have not found anything like that. So I did not go into prevalence because my 2.5-week mission did not allow me, and that was not the purpose of the mission. But just to mention that I'm very, very concerned about information integrity, and I have made a very specific recommendation with that regard, encouraging relevant actors to uphold information integrity and ethical and trauma-informed representation of sexual violence, including by respecting and safeguarding the dignity and identity of survivors, victims, and avoiding the sensationalization of headlines, media pressure, scrutiny. So there is a very specific recommendation because of I am extremely mindful of what has happened and what is going on, still going on. And on the one hand, we have the fog of war that often silences crimes of sexual violence, but we have also seen in the history of war instances where sexual violence can be weaponized. And I can tell you that I have come across interlocutors with a strong sentiment, especially members of community of different kibbutz, that they do not want that tag of sexual violence. And besides, like horrific crimes took place on the 7th of October. Really, really horrific crimes that no one needs any exaggeration.
Last question, Anade.
Thank you. SRSG, my name is Anadi Thiman with Al Jazeera English. I wanted to ask about reports in the media of an UNRWA investigation and whether or not this counts as the verified UN information that you would consider and possibly include in your report. So in the media it says there's an UNRWA investigation that's unpublished that says that UNRWA was able to talk to, 100 to 1,002 former detainees who were released in mid-February. And in their investigation and the interviews, they found, similar to you, they found evidence of detainees in Israeli detention stripped, blindfolded, sexually abused. And so you've spoken a lot about your mandate being about UN-verified information and being able to include that in your feedback and your report. Does this UNRWA investigation, is that included in your UN-verified information that you've discussed or you've seen? Similarly, will this UNRWA investigation end up in your annual report and the findings therefore?
Of course, I'm disturbed about the reports the reports that I got from Gaza that I was able to raise with the Israeli authorities. The report that you've mentioned, I read the New York Times. I don't know whether it's a report of UNRWA. I don't know the veracity of the information. Information that I will receive through the proper channel will be considered for potential inclusion in the annual report of the Secretary.
You haven't received this report that was reported in the New York Times?
I have not received this
Thank
report.
you.
I'm sorry, I know more of you had questions, but Ms. Patten has to go, but I know her office will be available. Thank you.
Approved of it, but because bodies were buried very quickly. And the first people to speak of it were women NGOs, who then blamed the UN for not investigating. But are they still functioning? Are you talking to them, the women NGOs who uncovered the stories of rape through people who were at the rave and so forth, the things you've heard since then? Are you still in touch with those groups?
Well, I have met, I think, at least 27 civil society organizations in Israel and many members of the academia. And no, I have not been personally in contact with them since my return, but they have been extremely dynamic. And at the same time, I have seen other reports popping up from some organizations, but I cannot speak to their findings. I can only speak to what I found on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you.